a spin-off and companion series to one of the 70s most popular shows, which in turn managed to be extremely successful in its own right.
Boy, it's just fun to watch, but it takes so much getting used to.
It's a series that reminds you weekly never to go skydiving with your fiancé, especially if he's a former astronaut with a flight safety record second to everyone.
Jaime Sommers, the robot lady.
The Bionic Woman.
You want to tell me about it?
Well, yeah, I want to tell you. I want to tell everybody.
The Bionic Woman was a 1970s action-adventure series starring Lindsay Wagner as, funnily enough, the Bionic Woman, where she's alternatively a teacher, a spy, a dog sitter, and whatever else you need for that week's show.
Well, maybe we could just find him a job here, huh?
It was screened alongside its sibling series, The $6 Million Man, on the American ABC network for 2 seasons from 1976, before heading over to NBC for its final year on air. The Bionic Woman began as a one-off character in The $6 Million Man, so we do talk about that series' origins in detail in our $6 Million Man review. In both shows, the main character had a near-fatal accident where each had bionic prosthetics that allowed them to thrive, and also made them superpowered agents for the government agency, the OSI, headed by Oscar Goldman.
Jaime Sommers. Remember Jaime?
Jaime Sommers was a tennis pro from Ojai in California. Her own parents had died when she was a teenager, after which Jaime became the ward of Steve Austin's mother, Helen, and his stepfather, Jim. Years later, Steve Austin and Jaime rekindled their relationship. They fell in love, got engaged,
Sweet Jaime, I'll love you forever.
And as you do, went skydiving, where things didn't go so well, and Jaime was horribly injured. Steve Austin begged Oscar to help Jaime in the same way that he had been helped years earlier, and Dr. Rudy Wells would end up performing the same life-saving surgery on Jaime.
What's wrong, Steve? I can't move my legs.
They're bionic too.
Oh, my God.
Like Steve, Jaime gained 2 nuclear-powered bionic legs and a right arm, which gave each of them super strength, the ability to run up to 60 miles per hour, and jump huge distances into the air, which would potentially make them the world's most effective triathletes, or if times got tough, bag snatchers. They would also likely be incredibly frustrating to be behind in the line for the airport metal detector when you're late for a flight.
Oh, Rudy. Can't you make a bionic skin that tans?
Jaime has a bionic ear, which allows her to overhear everything, where every distant conversation sounds like you're staying in a hotel room with a paper-thin wall and the guests in the next room are on their honeymoon, and they're enjoying it. Jaime can hear things like spies conspiring or crooks inadvertently revealing their plans, and of course, every cheesy 70s pickup line. What's cooking, good looking? Jaime had adjusted to being a bionic agent relatively well, though at times she would find the situation she's in a bit hard to take seriously. Jamie's day job was as a teacher at an Air Force base where her pupils were the children of base personnel, and she would later adopt a German Shepherd, Max. Spoilers, Max was also a bionic dog. Who's a good boy? Max is a good boy, who also happens to have a bionic jaw, so the dog food might need to be locked up in a titanium safe. Jaime managed to befriend Bigfoot, she dealt with numerous mad scientists, defeated the Fembots and killer computers, met some aliens, brought some crooks to justice, and just saw off many threats to world peace and espionage plots.
Feelings, nothing more than feelings.
She'd go on adventures with any number of characters played by famous guest stars, and at one point sat on the back of a motorcycle with Evel Knievel. I mean, he's the only person to have broken more bones than the Bionic Woman and the Bionic Man combined.
There was something I didn't tell you on the plane. I didn't want to worry you.
The Bionic Woman's story begins in the 2nd season of The $6 Million Man. Kenneth Johnson had been a talk show producer before moving into writing and directing for television in the early 70s. When pitching story ideas to executive producer Harve Bennett, Johnson outlined the idea of a bionic version of The Bride of Frankenstein, which would evolve into the concept of giving Steve Austin a bionic-powered girlfriend. The Bionic Woman storyline was at first a single episode, but then became a 2-parter. Steve renews his friendship with childhood friend Jaime Sommers. The pair fall in love and get engaged. After her skydiving accident and subsequent bionic rebuilding, Steve helps Jaime come to terms with her new abilities. It's not long before Oscar comes looking to collect on the debt. On their first mission together, things go well enough, though Jaime's occasionally having bursts of pain in her head. I can totally sympathise. The other day I woke up with a terrible headache, only to find a woodpecker had flown in an open window at dawn and mistaken my head for a tree stump. Again, the pain gets worse and Jaime runs off confused. At the end of Johnson's script, Jaime survived, but the network in particular wanted her to die, channeling the tragic vibe of the hit film Love Story, though as far as I can tell neither Ryan O'Neal nor Ali McGraw played bionic agents with a history of hard landings. Despite Johnson's misgivings, the script was amended with Jaime dying of a cerebral hemorrhage. With the broadcast of the Bionic Woman two-parter, the $6 Million Man's ratings hit a new high. But Jaime's death was deeply unpopular with the tens of thousands, if not millions of viewers with whom the character had resonated. As in, how fudging dare you kill off Jaime? Very quickly plans were made to resurrect the character at the start of the $6 Million Man's third year in the 1975-76 TV season with a two-parter called The Return of the Bionic Woman, where funnily enough, can you guess who comes back?
Was it Chuck Cunningham?
As it turns out, despite what Steve was led to believe, Jaime wasn't completely dead. She had been cryogenically frozen. Dr Rudy Wells and Dr Michael Marchetti had developed techniques to, well, it's not really important other than to say rumours of her death were greatly exaggerated and also retconned. Jaime was alive and well, but she'd been suffering from amnesia. According to Rudy and Michael, Jaime's pain could return if she remembered her relationship with Steve. Having heard him sing, I think we can all sympathise.
Make room for me in your heart.
Despite the clamour for the character's return, the guest star had other ideas. Lindsay Wagner had been under contract to Universal in the early 70s where she booked various guest shots on different television shows, but it was her appearance in the pilot episode of The Rockford Files that piqued the interest of Harve Bennett and Kenneth Johnson. Wagner had also appeared in two features in 1973, Two People and The Paper Chase. In the latter, she would play the daughter of a curmudgeon law professor played by John Houseman. Her contract with Universal was expiring, and the studio was slow in negotiating a renewal. Wagner took the job to appear as a guest in The $6 Million Man, but once her contract was up, she was free to do other work. Then the clamour to resurrect Jaime meant she'd eventually gain an enormous payday for 2 episodes of The $6 Million Man.
You sure it's legal for the stepfather of the groom to give the bride away?
Well, as long as the stepfather of the groom isn't the father of the bride, it's legal.
The return of the Bionic Woman revived Jaime Sommers, but the plot tied itself into knots in order to make sure the character was not romantically available to Steve Austin.
It's been fun, lots of laughs, Jamie.
If Jaime remembered or her memory came back too quickly, that could kill her.
Every time I start to think back, there's so much pain.
Also, Jaime was now in a relationship with Dr. Michael Marchetti, which formed a sort of bionic love triangle. Well, it's a love triangle, but only 2 sides are bionic, so it's a $12 million isosceles love triangle. Now that is rounding up on my part since the cost of Jaime's bionic upgrade was kept a secret. Officially, it was less than Steve Austin.
Oh, not quite $6 million. I mean, your parts are smaller.
And unofficially, it was less than $6 million, just in case it annoyed the star of The $6 Million Man. The episodes were again a success, and then the idea of making a fully fledged Bionic Woman series was mooted. And that's where Wagner really had the studio over a barrel. A barrel of what? It doesn't matter, it's a metaphor. What's a metaphor? I think every Facebook investor asks the same question. There was talk of recasting the role rather than give in to Wagner, but no one else seemed to have the right spark. If there was going to be a Bionic Woman series, it had to star Lindsay Wagner.
They're starting their offer at $5 million.
Really?
During negotiations for the series, her manager scored the actress a huge contract for the weekly series, with roles in additional telemovies as part of the deal. Despite her reluctance to take on a science fiction role, Wagner said yes, partly because of the show's ability to speak to young people, and partly because, if she wanted to, she could now afford to build not 1, not 2, but 3 full-size solid gold Saturn V rockets to put in her front yard.
That's all they gave you?
Meanwhile, Jaime Sommers is paying off her bionics in weekly installments, $5 a week out of her teacher's salary.
No, actually, I was thinking might be kind of nice being bionic.
It's not clear whether she can claim wear and tear on her bionics or whether she has to keep a logbook of how much her bionic abilities are used for work and how much is for private use. Depreciation of bionics is a tricky thing to get right, and if you don't want an audit, it's perhaps best to seek a tax professional with experience of superpowered clients. Kenneth Johnson had since become a producer on The $6 Million Man and was the logical writer to develop a Bionic Woman series. Johnson would work on both series throughout Bionic Woman's first season. He would often name characters in his scripts after people he knew, and would name Jaime Sommers after a SeaWorld water skier that he'd met on a previous program. To maintain the link with the $6 Million Man, there were several short cameos of Lee Majors popping up for a scene in The Bionic Woman, and likewise, Lindsay Wagner would randomly pop up on The $6 Million Man. Then there were the bigger crossovers, but we'll come back to that later on. Having a female-led spin-off action series wasn't unheard of. We'd already had The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. in the 60s, but by the 70s it was all about super-powered women. ABC had already tried their hand with two different versions of Wonder Woman, and by the time of The Bionic Woman we'd also have Secrets of Isis and Electra Woman and Dyna Girl. The success of Kenneth Johnson's Bionic Woman and later the Incredible Hulk series would also spur Marvel Comics into creating a She-Hulk character in the comics, to avoid Universal creating and owning their own female Hulk spin-off character, just as the studio had apparently done with The Bionic Woman.
Subject: The Bionic Woman, Jaime Sommers.
Welcome Home Jamie launched the Bionic Woman series in early 1976. Jamie left the care of Michael and Rudy to return home to Ojai, where she'd live in an apartment above a barn near the home of Helen and Jim. Jamie had taken a job as a teacher at the Air Base School, but would also take on missions for Oscar Goldman.
That's a good one. So what is he, a good guy or a bad guy?
Richard Anderson would play Oscar on both Bionic series, where he'd have a different relationship with the protagonist of each show. While Oscar would refer to Steve as pal, with Jamie it was babe. Anderson would play Oscar as someone who was deeply protective of Jamie, almost as an unrequited love. Martin E. Brooks would take over the role of Rudy Wells in both series, with the character becoming a regular on The Bionic Woman from its second season.
Play-Doh here is the product of an accidental drug discovery I made 4 months ago. I call it adrenalizine.
Martin Brooks was the third actor to play Dr. Rudy Wells, but obviously the third time's the charm. Rudy Wells was the genius who developed the technology that gave Jamie and Steve Austin their abilities. He also, apparently, invented bionic hair.
We can't do that. Franklin's last communication with the Fembots was not long enough for us to pinpoint the base.
The thing about having two Bionic series on air at the same time is you now hear that famous sound effect even more. One thing about The Bionic Woman, the sound editors would show far more restraint in using the iconic bionic sound effect. On The $6 Million Man, it's treated almost like a looping backing tape, while in The Bionic Woman, the famous sound effect is more like a special treat where your austere dentist father lets you eat a big bag of sugar on your birthday.
And you get a big bionic hug.
The first season of The Bionic Woman would intersperse scenes of Jamie and her students with the standard bionic action, and occasionally there'd be an overlap between the kids and the spy stuff. The first season begins with a Jamie who's a little more unsure of herself in espionage situations, and still coming to terms with what she can and can't do with her bionics. Her family situation evolved into having Steve Austin's parents as her guardians, and we learn her real parents weren't completely uninvolved in the world of espionage. A woman claiming to be Jamie's real mother turns up at one point. In another episode, a young girl has supernatural powers that threaten Jamie. She helps out the trainer of animals when local ranchers think a lion has been at their stock. Jamie finds out the con woman Lisa Galloway has had surgery to look like her.
I got your looks, but I sure don't have your moves.
Giving Lindsay Wagner a chance to play a double role.
I can't open it.
Would you care to make way for the $6 million can opener?
One episode, Fly Jamie, is a thinly veiled rewrite of an early $6 Million Man episode where a passenger plane crashed and Jamie has to deal with a few survivors who are, up to the usual, no good. There would be little bionic interludes popping up in the first half of the show, something for the kids to have fun with, before the action in the show's final act. The Bionic Woman generally didn't end episodes with massive fight scenes, but there'd be action enough, with Jamie dealing with lions, a lot of spies, and Andy Griffith. Throughout the show's 3-year run, Jamie would go undercover as a nun, a rally navigator, a Vegas showgirl, a crook pretending to be a dancer, a governess in a haunted house, a wrestler, a dealer in a casino, a country singer, a rookie cop, and as a beauty pageant contestant, where despite Jaime being introduced as a world-famous tennis player who'd played in the US Open and at Wimbledon, not a single person connected with the beauty pageant recognised her. In fact, the tennis connection seemed to be forgotten about pretty quickly, since being a world-famous athlete is probably not the best qualification for becoming a successful undercover operative. I mean, it only takes one crook to remember your face from the cover of an old magazine in a doctor's waiting room for your cover to be blown.
There's only going to be one Jaime Sommers now.
The first season felt like a sister show to The $6 Million Man, with similar plots, but there was something about the shows that felt a little more polished in their production. Most one-hour shows made by Universal, like $6 Million Man, were scheduled to be shot in 6 days, which put an enormous strain on the stars of these shows, especially if they were doing action scenes. Kenneth Johnson lobbied the studio to make Bionic Woman in a 7-day schedule, but was overruled. However, they'd still take 7 or 8 days to shoot anyway, so schedules schmedules. The studio eventually agreed to extend the schedule, and bit by bit, 7 days became the usual for most one-hour shows. Look, I too prefer a 7-day production schedule for things like this video, which is 1 day to write the script, 5 days of watching videos of surly cats being groomed, and then a mad rush in the final day to get something usable done. The budgets for The $6 Million Man started at around $500,000 an episode, and by the end of the Bionic Woman's run, that had increased to around $600,000 an episode. With a budget like that, just think how many bandages and skin grafts that cat groomer could now afford.
There's a guy named Austin. I owe him a lot of money, and if I don't come up with something real quick, he's going to get rough.
Like so many other series, Bionic Woman was mostly shot on sound stages and on the backlot at Universal City, where, if at all possible, any existing sets from other productions would be used, and at times, parts of the Universal Studios tour were co-opted for use in some episodes.
What in the world are you doing? I asked you to go get the mail.
With Richard Anderson and Martin E. Brooks propping up both Jaime's adventures and those of her former paramour Steve Austin, there were a number of other characters that would pop up in multiple episodes. Firstly, there was Jaime's one-time boyfriend, Dr. Michael Marchetti, played by Richard Lenz, who would appear in a few episodes of The Bionic Woman. Sam Chu Jr. would pop up as OSI agent Mark Russell. Martha Scott and Ford Rainey would often reprise their roles as Helen and Jim Elgin.
Okay, now you're not seeing this.
Who'd believe it anyway? You, do this a lot?
Christopher Stone showed up a few times in the third season as Chris Williams, the man who'd end the series as Jaime's boyfriend. And then there was Jennifer Darling as Peggy Callahan, Oscar's secretary and Jaime's best friend.
Mama, I can't talk right now.
On The $6 Million Man, Peggy is written as ditzy and a little neurotic and somewhat irritating. On The Bionic Woman, Peggy is written as an actual human being who you really quite care for. In both series, she finds out her boyfriend is using her to get top secret information. But it's only on The Bionic Woman that you actually feel bad for her.
Yeah, I think so.
You sure?
In fact, there's much more of a human touch to Bionic Woman episodes, and that's probably exemplified by Lindsay Wagner's performance. Now, as somebody who's a huge fan of The $6 Million Man and of Lee Majors, Lindsay Wagner is just a much more versatile actor, conveying the lead character's range of emotions effectively. It is little wonder that Lindsay Wagner would win an Emmy Award for her role in The Bionic Woman, a feat that only a relatively select group of actors in genre shows have since managed.
She can be very convincing.
Jaime was a world away from the strong, silent, chewing on a match type of Steve Austin. She could show fear even when her bionics clearly gave her an enormous advantage over almost everybody she came across. Jaime would also become more confident in her abilities over the course of the series, where she was less and less concerned with holding together other people's fragile egos.
Now make sure you don't miss a cue ball, honey.
The Bionic Woman series did use Richard Anderson much more effectively than on $6 Million Man.
I wouldn't call you if we didn't need you.
Whereas on the Lee Majors-led series, Goldman would usually issue orders to Steve at the start of the episode and then spend the rest of the hour standing next to a telephone looking very concerned. On The Bionic Woman, Oscar was, well, in a lot of episodes he basically did the same thing, but there were more occasions where he played a much bigger part of the action. Dr. Rudy Wells also appears more often, but the competing production schedules of both shows meant occasionally you would get stand-in characters for an episode. With its second season, The Bionic Woman kicked into high gear with many of the best and most memorable installments. Jaime was still nominally a school teacher, though the kids were shown only very occasionally this season. The extra expense and restricted hours when using child performers was deemed not worth the effort. Also, truth be told, they could be annoying, especially Cousin Oliver. Or maybe they just disappeared after the lion ate them.
Look, I know I'm close to finding this complex, or you wouldn't be so anxious to get me out of here.
The second year of The Bionic Woman was where the crossovers with the $6 Million Man's fourth season were upgraded from being single scenes into major viewing events.
Jamie, tell us about the robots.
The audiences for both shows were solid, with a high proportion of viewers watching both, but there were people who would watch one show or the other. The crossover shows would be multi-part stories where the plot began on one show and then you'd have to watch the other show for the conclusion. The $6 Million Man's fourth season kicked off with a sequel to the popular Bigfoot episode of the previous year, with a story that would conclude in the Bionic Woman's second season opener. The aliens who controlled Bigfoot have now split into factions, and an alien, Sandy Duncan, has to help Steve remember his adventure from the previous year. This time, Jaime gets in on the action, helping free Bigfoot from being controlled by John Saxon and save the aliens led by Stephanie Powers. The return of Bigfoot crossover was incredibly fun, though anytime Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner were in a show together, it was a great time.
But I don't think you have turned against her, have you? They're making you do this, attack Steve and me.
And then a few weeks later, there would be the three-part epic Kill Oscar, which began on The Bionic Woman. The middle part was an episode of The $6 Million Man, and then the story was concluded with a Bionic Woman installment. The $6 Million Man episodes would feature more of Lee Majors, and likewise, the Bionic Woman episode would focus more on Lindsay Wagner. A former OSI scientist, Dr. Franklin, has created robotic fembots to steal a weather control system. The fembots are a tough foe for Jaime or Steve to beat on their own, but when the latches holding their faces on are made by Stellantis, it does become very easy to tell the robot Callahan from the real one. Kill Oscar is even more fun, especially in the final episode where the pair have to work together infiltrating Dr. Franklin's island complex.
I order all action units of the OSI and the NSB to be mobilized to kill me.
These crossovers were massive events, but when the two shows were on competing networks for what turned out to be each show's final year, the crossovers ceased. Despite both Rudy Wells and Oscar Goldman appearing on both shows, mentions of the lead of the series broadcast by another network were minimal at best. It's similar to the legal restrictions on the speeches given at Auntie Beryl's third wedding reception. That's not to say she was married 3 times, that's just due to a cavalcade of mishaps involving her bail conditions, his bail conditions, and a non-disclosure agreement with the car company involved in the civil suit. It's all a big hullabaloo. That's not to say the Bionic Woman episodes fell apart without Steve Austin. The second season features some absolute classics. Doomsday's Tomorrow ends up as my favourite installment of the series. Jaime is in a race against time to stop a doomsday weapon about to be triggered by a disaffected scientist. Jaime has to pass through several security trials controlled by a computer. Her bionics are damaged and she attempts to reason with the computer.
You've lost, and there's no one to repair you.
Jaime had tangled with her doppelganger Lisa Galloway in the first season. But here a nefarious plot has Jaime swapped with prisoner Lisa and about to be given Lisa's original face. No one believes Jaime is not Lisa Galloway, even Oscar.
It does take seeing something in another person before you realise that you have that something yourself.
Jamie Shield sees Jaime at the police academy in part 1, and in the second episode she's a rookie cop. Another show saw Jaime undercover in a convent, motivating a group of nuns to stand up to some crooks and the bishop. A comedy-focused episode paired Jaime with art forger Pierre Lambert. The episode Biofeedback was about a man who could do things with his body just by mental control, which was an interesting episode championed later by Wagner herself. I personally have trained my body to such a high level that I can willingly eat an entire packet of chocolate chip cookies in an hour. It's just mind over matter. One of the silliest but most fun episodes featured real-life motorcycle daredevil Evel Knievel, where he played himself. Knievel is no actor, but he's a lot of fun in the episode, where Jaime refuses to believe that he's not the real Evel Knievel for much of the episode.
Knievel, remember Evel Knievel?
Okay, you can be Evel Knievel, you can be Gunga Din, I don't care what you just, I need your help.
Look, you little ding-dong, I am Evel Knievel.
Don't shout!
The Motorcycle Boogie episode was a relatively troublesome production, with numerous delays linked to Wagner and Knievel not getting along. There are odd clunkers, episodes that seem about as disappointing as a LinkedIn connection request from your grandmother.
What did they send me? A girl with a funny name.
Of course, like most series, there were behind-the-scenes problems and issues along the way. A few weeks into the filming of the first season, Lindsay Wagner was involved in a car crash that led to production stopping for a few weeks while she recuperated. She was mostly unharmed, but did acquire a small scar on her lip.
You better find that Iceman and the energy cells before it's too late.
Lindsay Wagner, who'd not gone into the series because she had a burning passion to run in slow motion, felt taking on a role on a weekly series would prevent her from becoming an actor in major movies. At the time, if you became a TV star, you were highly unlikely to be able to translate that into movie stardom. And vice versa, but I don't think there were that many movie stars that cared about the vice versa part.
I'm happy where I belong.
The actress's attitude to the TV show wasn't unnoticed, despite her generally good working relationship with the cast and crew. However, Wagner and series creator Kenneth Johnson would regularly butt heads, and not in a cute way like a pair of hyper-competitive baby moose, but in a way that would go beyond creative differences, leading to Wagner demanding Johnson leave the show. One of the many but minor points of contention, the insistence of the shot of Wagner having to pull back her hair to use her super-sensitive hearing. Hair, of course, is not generally used for sound insulation, but this scene was a visual aid for the audience, much in the same way Lee Majors would have to stop so the camera could zoom into his bionic eye. When Lindsay Wagner decided she wasn't going to pull her hair back so much each time, the producers eventually settled on reusing ear shots from previous episodes.
That's terrible. Kind of intriguing, though.
I dig. My own hair is a work of art, requiring a team of hair care specialists to give me just the right amount of just woke up and don't care without it looking like I just woke up and don't care. I've been at the hairdresser since 4 a.m. and clearly I do care, just so long as you don't think I care. I mean, I care about hair care. I care.
What do you think?
Oh my word, it's fantastic.
A few episodes into the third season, Johnson left abruptly in the middle of the filming of the episode Motorcycle Boogie, where he would be replaced as producer by writer Arthur Rowe, with Lionel Siegel also taking over from Harve Bennett as executive producer of both Bionic series around the same time. The show's third season saw the series heading to NBC, while changes were relatively minor. The main takeaway was that there were no longer crossovers with the $6 Million Man over on ABC. Jaime was allowed to date a bit more this season, and she'd soon gained a new best friend, Max. Max was a German Shepherd who'd been injured in a lab fire and became the first recipient/test subject of the bionic parts that would eventually be used to save the lives of both Steve and Jaime. Max was a surly dog who'd had a dislike of Rudy Wells, and rather than allow him to be destroyed, Jaime worked with the dog to moderate his behaviour, where she'd eventually adopt him. Max could also run it up to 60 miles an hour and had a bionic jaw, which does sound like the guy that I was sitting next to on a flight from Seattle to Tokyo. For 10 hours, he would just not stop talking about his $10,000 mountain bike. Even when he started talking about skiing and swimming the English Channel, somehow the bragging about his goddamn $10,000 mountain bike kept creeping into the very one-sided conversation. You don't believe me? He gave me his business card.
Which makes him a very unpopular man. A lot of people would like to see him dead.
The third season to The Bionic Woman was similar to earlier seasons, though it would lean a little more into the fantastical than before, with aliens and fake aliens. Johnson had said there was a limit to the amount an audience would buy. Basically, they could believe a bionic person could do some things, but not everything.
That's a 24-foot jump, Jaime. Do you really think you can...
Limits were good for audience believability, as well as drama. The commonly cited example, Jaime could lift a car, but not a truck, or jump 2 stories, but not 3. Look, I dig, I can lift a car. But as for a truck, oof. Jaime's bionics could be put out of action by damage or injury, and of course would stop working altogether in freezing conditions. The bionic ear was jolly useful in a show where crooks and spies would regularly discuss their plans between themselves when they thought nobody could hear.
And then I turned to her sister and said, "What's cooking, good looking?" And yeah, that's when I got the drink in the face.
In the third season, we'd have an alien ship kidnapping Rudy Wells, which would turn out to be a chopper with a hologram. A boyfriend of Jaime has a near-death experience where he tries to communicate with Jaime from a different plane of existence. The Fembots returned in Fembots in Vegas, this time controlled by Dr. Franklin's son.
Nobody's improved on your kind since Helen of Troy.
Jamie worked with a reclusive billionaire to defeat the latest Fembot plot, with even more faces coming off.
Oh, no, come on, no.
The twist, the villain himself is a robot. Jamie finds herself in a pyramid in California with an alien predicting the end of the world. The episode is not, however, called The Pyramid Scheme. Another sees Callahan mistaken by crooks looking to kidnap Jaime Sommers.
I know she's 5'8". When I said small, I was referring to her weight.
This is one of a few episodes this season where Jamie is in fewer scenes than usual. 2 other episodes have Jamie hospitalized or out of action for most of the episode, and one of those was possibly a trial run for a possible Bionic Dog series featuring Maximilian the Bionic Dog. The show's final episode was a unique one since the cast and crew knew the show would be ending at the end of the 3rd season. Lindsay Wagner wanted the show to have an ending of sorts. Writer Stephen E. D'Souza was brought in to wrap up the show with Jamie getting to the point where she was fed up with working as a spy. The pivotal moment when a young girl rescued by Jamie sees the damage on Jamie's arm.
What are you?
The girl freaks out a bit like a first date where your dinner companion asks you if they mind if they can bring their plumber along with them to Dairy Queen.
The robot lady. The robot lady.
Jamie decides she needs to do something else with her life and resigns from the OSI. Oscar seems crestfallen, but things take a turn when another government bureaucrat uses Jamie's now unregulated bionics as an excuse to take over the OSI's responsibilities.
What?
Say it!
Jaime Sommers.
Good!
With Oscar's help, Jamie goes into hiding, though she's eventually tracked down by Chris. For Jamie, it's either going on the lam or being held in a gilded cage where she could want for nothing apart from her own personal freedom. Jamie does decide to return to work for the OSI with a number of caveats that everybody accepts.
I'm very glad that you're going to be coming back here to help remind us that we're human.
The Bionic Woman ended in May of 1978, with The $6 Million Man also ending around the same time.
We know you're a bionic woman.
No, sir. I'm just a woman.
Despite the show's ratings holding well and despite the various awards and nominations, ABC decided to cancel the series at the end of The Bionic Woman's 2nd season. NBC picked up the series for the 1977-78 season, but would again cancel the show at the end of the show's 3rd season.
Well, that was a short trip.
The theory is the executives at ABC who cancelled the show moved to NBC just so they could cancel the show again.
I knew something was going to happen when I couldn't erase that program.
History does not record if CBS attempted to take on the show just so they'd have a shot at cancelling it. I mean, no one really likes being left out. The juicier gossip is that ABC executive Fred Silverman, who was originally an advocate for Wagner playing the Bionic Woman, soured on Wagner, cancelled the series first at ABC and then again after he moved to NBC. Ratings were high, but the demographics were the issue. The people watching weren't the groups the advertisers prized, which, if nothing else, is a pretty good way of measuring short-sightedness.
Can you describe the pitch of the sound?
The Bionic Woman's theme tune was written by Jerry Fielding, but Kenneth Johnson wanted to bring in somebody he'd worked with previously, Joseph Harnell. Harnell wrote a new theme tune, but Fielding was not pleased. A compromise was reached where Fielding's theme was used for the introduction and Harnell's similar tune accompanying the closing credits. And that was the one that was generally referenced during the show's backing score. The Bionic Woman's opening titles used a similar style of animation to the $6 Million Man's iconic intro sequence. And then the sequence slows down to the mellow theme tune, accompanied by a montage where I assume Ken Burns was at home taking notes.
Those nuts are coming over here to this table anyway.
The Bionic Woman had a cavalcade of actors who were big names in their day, many who'd been the stars of their own series at one point or another, or just some movie stars enjoying a week on a TV set. And of course there's the usual up-and-comers, and various character actors of the day who used to appear in everything. We'll just point out a few, with the weirdest being a very young Helen Hunt playing an alien. Deep Space Nine's Rene Auberjonois, and also people like Vincent Price, John Houseman, James Olsen, Andy Griffith, and motorcycle daredevil Evel Knievel.
I knew you weren't Evel Knievel.
Lindsay Wagner played a tennis pro turned spy, though as many, including Wagner herself, would realise, the actress was not a natural athlete. Lindsay Wagner performed some of her own running and stunt work, but was also doubled by others.
No normal human being could have avoided my laser guns.
Many of the scenes of Jamie in long shots and action scenes were played by her photo double Inga Lindgren for things like minor movements, but for more complicated gags, stunt woman Rita Eggleston did most of the energetic and dangerous stunts on the series. Bionic Woman also used slow motion for bionic running and battle scenes. But as well as the standard shooting at a higher frame rate to get slow motion when played back at usual speed, a lot of bionic stuff was just normal footage slowed down in post-production, which is evidenced by a jerky emotion. Speaking of jerky emotion, the time Uncle Reg tried to trademark the phrase, "What's cookin', good lookin'." After the show ended, Lindsay Wagner would become a fixture in TV movies. Series creator Kenneth Johnson was by now already hip-deep in The Incredible Hulk, and he'd later create the miniseries V, discussion of which may be used by paramedics to diagnose concussion after a car accident. Many Bionic Woman crew would roll onto the Hulk series. Writer James D. Parrott would later create Voyagers, Misfits of Science, and Forever Night. Stephen E. D'Souza would work on Die Hard and direct the Street Fighter movie. And then in the late 1980s and the early 90s, 3 television movies reunited Steve Austin and Jaime Sommers. First, there was The Return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, a title that's not just a mouthful, but a choking hazard. There was Bionic Showdown, and finally, Bionic Ever After, where Steve Austin and Jaime Sommers finally married. There was also a very, very short-lived Bionic Woman series from 2007, which starred British actress Michelle Ryan. One person who was a huge fan of the Bionic shows was Japanese game developer Hideo Kojima, who would cast Lindsay Wagner in his game Death Stranding.
Jamie, you can't fight fembots.
Who said anything about fighting him? I'm just gonna run like crazy.
The Fembots, possibly the series' most famous foes, were a name that was initially thought silly by producer Kenneth Johnson, yet somehow perfect. That silly name would later inspire the similar Fembots in the Austin Powers movies.
I told you you can't hurt me, Jamie.
Oh, shut up!
As with the $6 Million Man toy line from Kenner, there were also toys for the Bionic Woman. Of course, the boy toys were action figures, and the girl toys were dolls, despite them otherwise being exactly the same. And over Kenneth Johnson's protests, Kenner was content with stereotyping and using the same business model as Barbie for their Bionic Woman branded toys. Basically, lots of clothes and makeup and a purse. There'd be other toys released later on. But while I was making this video, I took the opportunity to add a Jamie and an Oscar to stand next to my Steve Austin. So that's 1 doll and 2 action figures for those who insist on separate terms for the same damn thing.
Oh, great. Where am I going to get one of those?
I grew up in the tail end of the Bionic era, where I most likely don't actually have any memory of watching the shows when they were first broadcast, though I knew enough about them at the time, as it tended to be repeated where I lived much more often. I do recall a good number of episodes from the mid-80s showing during school holidays. But as for a full rewatch, that would take for the remastering of both Bionic shows in high definition for me to watch both series in full.
You're hurting my arm.
As much as I have loved The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman is in some ways a show that's held up a little better, partly due to the fact that the makers had the experience of The $6 Million Man's first few seasons, plus their leading lady was keen to make the show more than just a show about slow-motion punch-ups. There's a time and place for everything, and the time and place for a slow-motion punch-up is either in the schoolyard or when residents of 2 rival retirement communities show up for the early bird specials at Denny's.
That's not funny.
Decades later, the Bionic Woman still holds a special place in the hearts of those who grew up with the adventures of Jaime Sommers and her crash-happy bionic buddy Steve Austin. If you asked me which show was better, I'd probably say whichever happened to be on the screen at that particular time.
I mean, I love it.
But the answer really is the Bionic Woman. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.